Hey, everybody. Welcome to You Own It with Jerry Thompson. And this month it is March 2026. The weather is great. It's about 65 degrees out here in Buffalo, and it's getting to be a good time of year to put your house on the market. Right now, there's a scarcity of inventory, meaning there's no houses for sale. And there is a bit of what I'd call high level buyer activity with lower interest rates. People are attacking houses with the same frenzy they have the last 5 or 6 years, at least in the Buffalo, Western New York market. Again, I always want to tell everybody this is market driven. So I had an experience last weekend and I wanted to kind of share it and use it as a reason to kind of teach again. Um, when you are thinking about buying a house, one of the challenges is it's a very competitive market. So it can be frustrating in that you can go from house to house to house to house, and you can end up losing a number of offers. And I had a house on Clinton Street in Elma that we ended up going on the market on Thursday evening, and we had 42 showings between Thursday and Saturday, and ended up with 11 offers. And I was showing it on, I think it was Friday evening or Thursday night. Somebody had called me right away and wanted to see the house, and we ran over there because they were very excited about it. And we started to talk in the living room about what it might take to win price wise. And I had said, as the listing agent, look, um, this is going to be highly competitive. We have offer or showings that are going to be, in the 30s, maybe 40 by Saturday evening, and it looks like we're going to get at least 5, if not more offers. And the buyer reacted negatively and said, I don't play these games. You're asking 259. I don't understand this market. And this is just, doesn't make any sense. And and I get that every once in a while from people because they grow frustrated because houses sell for over list price. And so I thought I'd talk a little bit today about the seller's mindset when they're picking pricing, the agent's mindset when they're picking pricing, and why they do what they do. Because it's important to understand that as a buyer, there are no moral victories. If you lose when you're making an offer. And if you react emotionally to the seller's market strategy, be it low price with multiple offers to get it bid up, or be it a higher price where you have to bid down, if you react angrily, like somehow it's their fault by simply using the market momentum to their advantage, just as you'd like to use your buyer's strength to your advantage, it's a recipe to lose over and over and over again. So let's start by talking about what I call the gas gauge of pricing strategy. If you get in your car and you still have a gas vehicle, there's a gas gauge. Starts empty, goes to full. When a home seller is establishing what they're hoping to get, if they have a good agent, they're getting advice on where to price that house based on comparable or similar properties. So to give you a great, I guess, I don't know if analogy would be the right word, but let's talk about when that seller meets with somebody. Let's say they have a 3-bedroom, 1-bath ranch house, and it's in a specific town. Let's say it's in West Seneca, New York, which is about 5 miles that way from me. They will look at other ranches in the neighborhood that sold, and they'll look at 3 things. They'll look at what the houses were listed for, what they sold for, and the time on the market. When that seller looks at those 3 things with their agent, they will discuss. I use a gas gauge because it's a visual people can understand. If the average sale price is 300, let's say, it's in the middle of the gas gauge, half full. That is your market average. Now, a good agent will acknowledge or admit, I never know exactly what the house will sell for. I know where to place you on the gas gauge. I know to say this is the middle. Based on other houses in your neighborhood, this is about where you should sell. But because each house is its own unique character, its own unique thing, and the buyers in that marketplace will recognize it for that, sometimes houses will sell way to the full side, and sometimes houses will sell to the empty side because of something that may be obsolete. Something that you think is great, but new buyers don't want. So when a seller is pricing, they're looking at the middle of the gauge and they're saying, these are my averages. Let's say my market averages in my neighborhood is $300,000. Now they'll have a serious conversation with the agent, and a good agent will say to you, look, I can lie to you and wow you by making miracle statements and guarantees and high prices and all this other stuff. Or I can use the average, give you my professional opinion, and give you a range of price ranges that you can choose from a marketing strategy when you go on the market. And that conversation is between you and the agent. It's not really up to the buyer to make that decision. It's you as a seller and the agent. Some sellers will choose to take a lower price range strategy. And let me tell you, since 2016, at least in the Buffalo, Western New York market, pricing your house a little bit below the market average or where you believe the house should sell has a tendency to fit what buyers are expecting in today's world. Meaning when buyers come into the house, more often than not, they're calculating that they need to pay more to win. And so when you get an average of 300, if you pick a price at 284, buyers will come in with the house already expecting to have to compete and pay more. And if that's the case, you have a tendency to get more activity. You have a tendency to get more experienced buyers that are in the market that are seeing houses go for more. And you might get more offers, which gives you a better choice as to terms and pricing and deposits and closing date and how they're financing, which is picking towards the empty side of the gas gauge in the hope that the sale price will be driven up closer to the full, right? That's picking a lower price strategy. Some sellers don't believe it. They're kind of what I call an old school seller. Up till 2015, it was very traditional to get that middle and then a seller to say, but my house is better, and decide to price their house on an average of 310, price it at 314. They expected 60 days on the market. Buyers expected to be able to negotiate a deal off of the list price. And that was the expectation. Today's world, that is not the expectation. So if the average price is 300, if a seller prices at 330, expecting to negotiate down to 300, buyers going into that house on day one expect to pay 350 plus. So when they walk in the house, they're expecting better than what you're listed at. And when they see it listed at that, often it can be a discouraging factor. That is because it is a seller's market in our location. So back to the beginning of the tale, when the buyer that was in the house was frustrated because the house was listed at 259, that was a house that the middle of the gas gauge was over. We picked the lower end because of a market strategy decision. We expected it to go for more. Buyers' expectations were far exceeded. It created a feeding frenzy, created multiple offers, and the seller had their pick of offers that were way over list price to choose from. And the house was sold in 3 days. The buyer's frustration is simply they were losing houses because they were wrapping themselves in the moral blanket of, I don't do that. Well, okay, then you don't have a house. You have to, as a buyer in this market, you have to take your hands over your eyes when it comes to list price. Ignore the list price and determine the value based on what you've seen, because the sellers have their average. And ask your agent, hey, what are the averages for houses like this in the market? Where do I think they fell on the gas gauge of pricing strategy? Did they come in high? If they did, you'll see the house linger on the market 12, 20, 30, 40 days, which traditionally says high price. Those are houses maybe you want to try to negotiate down at that point. If something's on the market for 90 days, they haven't made a price adjustment, it's the price, folks. People do that all the time. Oh, I see that house is on the market for a while. Why hasn't it sold? Oh, the price. And I know somebody out there might go, oh, no, there's something else. It's always the price. It's always the price. Everybody would buy a house with defects for $2 if the lot was worth $100,000 and you could fix it up and make and sell it for $450. Everybody would take something for $1. What's the risk, right? And nobody would pay $1 million for something that's worth $200. It's the price. So when you're thinking about buying, don't react. When you see a competitive market, don't react in the way like, I'm not gonna play in this sandbox. Because functionally what happens is you're leaving the sandbox, you're leaving the toys, and you're not getting what you want, which is to win the house. Ignore the damn list price. Quit freaking out over strategy that sellers are taking. It's not their fault that they're doing what the market dictates to win. Those are the rules of the game, and you don't want to play in them, don't play. Now, here's what I'm trying to educate you on if you're thinking about buying. There are 7 things a seller will look at when they're trying to decide on an offer. First, when you look at a house, determine that gas gauge. Determine what's a good, reasonable, average market value of the house, what's the high, what's the full, and what's the empty. Have a good buyer's agent that will be able to tell you that. Ignore, with blinders, what the seller is asking. Determine your gas gauge. What's the middle? What is the highest I'm going to pay? What is the lowest I would pay? And then from there, determine your strategy in buying and winning the purchase of the house. That's what sellers are thinking. You need to think the same way as a buyer. You need to go and say, if I was selling this house and I was pricing it this way, what is my intent? Now, as a buyer, if I say they're pricing it low to create a feeding frenzy and get multiple offers, the question becomes, if I'm buying it, what do I think full side is? And am I willing to buy it at that price? And if I'm not, do I think I can get it in at 3/4? Do I think I can win it at the average market because my terms are good? And now let me give you quickly the bullet points and the reason that sellers make decisions. So you can also think like a seller. So just before I go back through these bullet points, let's go through this really quickly again. As a buyer, if you believe a house is listed on the low end, it is probably good chance it is, and it's going to go way over. Don't be mad about it. Be prepared to compete. As a seller, when you are pricing your house, understand the middle and understand the difference between pricing it too high towards the full side of the gauge and hoping to negotiate down, which used to work in 1997. It does not work in 2026. And then understanding the difference between pricing a little bit on the higher side, a little bit on the lower side, or aggressively on the lower side. And your agent should be able to tell you what their expectations would be on that from an activity and offers perspective. What they can never tell you, they can tell you the average and the gas gauge, but what a good agent will never say to you is they can guarantee you a certain price. Because unless they're giving you the check, the only one that can is the real buyer. So now, as a buyer, when you walk in and you understand that formula, you understand the sellers looked at the market averages, looked at the comparables, picked an average value, looked at the middle, given a range 10 to 15% on either side, and taken a market strategy and choosing that price. Here are the 7 things you need to focus on to win in those offers. Now that you know what you're willing to do, The first thing the seller is always going to look at is obviously the price. The highest price will win, assuming that the rest of the terms are as good as they can get. The highest price does not always win. Sometimes it's terms. Sometimes it's mortgage financing. Sometimes it is the amount or the percentage of the mortgage. So when you look at offer, the highest price always moves the meter, and you need to be competitive with price in order to win. If you're cash, and I've said this back in probably podcast number 1, there used to be a term, cash is king. I've modified that a little bit. Cash is king only if you're close to the throne, to the highest price. If you're way below, people don't give a crap about cash. They just don't. If you were selling something and I said to you, you need to wait 3 weeks to get the mortgage, but I'm going to get you $40,000 more. And as long as the mortgage approves it and it appraises okay, you get $40,000. And if you don't in 3 weeks, the cash is still going to be there because most of the time it is because they haven't found another house. What would you do? Roll the dice for $40,000 3 weeks of your life? Or would you take the cash and the sure thing? I've had an occasional situation where people say, I want the third thing. I've got to move on. I've got this motivation. I've got this thing. But 95% of the people have a price that they don't, cash does not move the needle on. Is it 5,000, 10,000, 20,000? Once you get 5, 10 above that amount of money, it becomes harder for a seller to take cash. So price is the number one factor. You need to pick a price that puts you in the ballpark so that you can win on terms. Second thing a seller is looking at is the strength of the financing. And here's where we talk about cash, right? So if you are close to the highest price, what kind of financing are you getting? What is the risk? And if I was going to give you a quick bullet point hierarchy, obviously cash or same as cash is the strongest, lowest risk from a financing perspective. There are mortgage programs now, when I say same as cash, where the lender will guarantee the house will close, whether or not the buyer is able to get the mortgage at the end or not. And that is what's called the same as cash program. The buyer traditionally is putting 20% down on a deposit that is non-refundable to them if they back out for any reason, and the lender is forced to close the property. So cash, same as cash. Those are number one, high priority. Number two, high down payment, conventional mortgages, meaning conventional mortgage is more a standard mortgage product, doesn't require as much secondary underwriting would be the simple way to put it. VA, FHA, USDA have kind of secondary resale requirements. So, the appraisers have a tendency to be a little bit more flexible with repairs, peeling paint and, picky uni stuff for the most part. But on occasion, it can be a little more significant. So it goes cash, conventional mortgage product. And then in the remaining hierarchy would be FHA, VA loans, USDA loans, Sunny Mae loans, only because they require a little bit more stringent underwriting. And you could kind of throw a rope around all those loans. Most of those loan products are excellent loan products. And there's not really a problem with them. But usually, if you're giving kind of a little bit risk-reward scenario, cash has got no risk. Very high down payment, conventional mortgage, meaning 20% or higher down, and the bank is only financing 80%, so it doesn't need to be insured. Then higher down payment, FHA, VA, USDA, Sunny Mae loans, those would work as well to help lower the risk, because the greater the down payment, the lesser the risk to the seller. And then strength of the pre-approval. A good local bank, I use Premium Mortgage often because they're a trusted lender with agents locally here, not these shoddy kind of over the 800 number pre-qualification forms. I saw one last week on a house, and I asked the buyer's agent to get a local pre-approval, and the buyer wouldn't do it, and it almost cost them the house. I ended up calling the national bank and getting permission to talk to them for the buyer to verify that their pre-approval looked at their credit, looked at their income, looked at their tax form, verified their assets, because it wasn't on the pre-approval letter. It was a pre-qualification letter, which is a a little bit of a weaker pre-approval. It just didn't highlight that the underwriter had actually looked at the stuff on the letter, and it almost cost them the house because they were a little higher in price, kept them in the ballpark, and then we had to work through a couple problems over the next day or two. Now, offer price, financing strength, earnest money deposit. How much money are you going to put down in escrow with the broker here in Western New York or with the escrow agent in other areas of the country to show that you're sincere about buying the house, that you're just not going to arbitrarily walk away? Any contingencies, home sales contingencies, meaning do you have to sell a house? Home inspection contingencies, meaning are you going to buy the house, take a week to do an inspection where you can arbitrarily back out or not? Now, this is another one of those scenarios where I get often inspectors and buyers sitting in houses and saying to me, well, this is ridiculous. Sellers aren't letting us do inspections. Sellers will always let you do inspections. You just may not win with the condition. So if you're a home seller and you have two offers and they're both $300,000, one is subject to a home inspection within 5 days and the other one is not, which one are you going to take? Assuming other things are equal. And then what I try to explain often to inspectors who are making this demand, they believe that somehow that inspection is, going to save the buyer from defects later, which is not really the case. Is that if you're a seller and you have 8 offers and the number one offer is $300,000, and it has an inspection within 7 days in which the buyer can back out for any reason whatsoever. The second place offer, assuming all the terms and conditions are the same, is $298 without an inspection. The third place offer is $297 without an inspection, and the fourth place offer is $290 without an inspection. If you take the $300 with the inspection and the buyer backs out in 5 days, what can happen is second and third aren't interested anymore or have bought another house, or you've stigmatized the house because the house has been off the market. It comes back because of an inspection, and often the buyer that does the inspection doesn't tell the seller what the issue is. And now the listing agent's got to go back to 2, 3 to see if they're still interested. Where if they had just accepted number 2, the seller's done. So if you're a seller and you're thinking, if I take this house with an inspection, I'm off the market for 2 to 5 days, and then somebody backs out and I go back and I lose 2 and 3, my buyer number 4 is $10,000 less. Why don't I just take the one now for $2,000 less? There's a value to all this stuff. So you need to make sure as a buyer going in, you think like a seller. What is important to the seller? The highest price, the best financing term, limited contingencies like home inspections, financing, sale of another home. The fewer of those contingencies, the better off you are. You almost want no contingencies if you can. When you want to close, seller has sometimes expectations for close date. I had one last week that worked out wonderfully where the seller had specifically asked they want to move a certain time frame right after high school ends, or actually college, right after their child graduates from college because they were still living at home, and then they needed or preferred 2 weeks to move afterwards. A buyer came in astutely, day number 2 on the market, made a very good offer, and gave them their closing terms, and the seller took it because not everybody was going to offer them their closing terms. Closing terms can be a priority to a home seller. And you as a home seller, if you take that gas gauge theory, what's my average price? If you offer it towards the empty side, I don't know the empty side, right? Empty, full. I'm probably backwards on camera, but if you have a lower price as a seller and you say to a buyer, I need specific terms, I'm building a house, I need to close in 4 months, oftentimes you'll get offers that will meet that expectation if that's the one that's the most important to you. So as a buyer, you need to think through, okay, if I want to get into the price basket, I want to get close, I want to be the top competitor, I want to have a very good deposit, I want to limit my contingencies, I want to make my financing terms very strong. I want to meet the seller's closing time frame. Extra stuff, I call it. So, price, deposit, home inspection. Is it a contingency or not? Contingencies. Financing terms. Closing date. Extra stuff. Extra stuff is a deal killer. Don't ask for stuff the seller hasn't offered if you're in a multiple offer situation. Yeah, they have a tractor. They're probably not taking it with them. But more often than not, what happens when you make offers on extra stuff, you make an offer on their dining room set and you want it included in the offer. The dining room set itself maybe have no value or limited value to you, but it could be a family heirloom. Or it could be this collection, Kittinger collection, specific furniture that the seller paid $12,000 for in 1982, and they see it having a much greater value than a throw-in. Don't ask for the extra stuff. Buy the house, get it under contract, then have that conversation. Hey, would you guys be interested, if you're moving, are you interested in selling stuff? Would you leave some stuff? Deal with it as like an after-the-fact casual conversation once everybody has stopped that tension of the negotiation where everybody's tense, seller's tense, you're tense. They're all looking at the offers. And then after the offer's accepted and the conditions are removed, everybody goes, oh. That's when you can go, hey, I love your house. I don't know what you're going to be doing with that tractor. You thinking about selling it? Or if you aren't selling it, do you want to leave it? Sometimes you'll find that strategy gets you way ahead of the game, right? And then the last thing is what I call certainty, simplicity, and honestly, the professionals you're working with. So when you are making an offer, you are filling out here in Western New York, or you're having your agent fill out a 15 to 19 pages of contracts and forms. Oftentimes, and this is just what happens all the time to me as a full-time professional, this is all I do, real estate agent. Agents will bring in crappy paperwork. Just shoddy, blanks not filled in, questionable empty spaces. For example, they'll put a price in. They'll put the deposit in the wrong column, so I can't tell whether or not it's the deposit or a seller's concession. They won't fill out a questionnaire, which is on page 2 in our contracts, which asks, lists all of the, is it an agricultural district? Does the seller have star exemptions? What type of septic it is? Yes, it's a series of yes and no's questions. They miss that page entirely. Or they put financing. Yes. They don't fill out the details. They don't submit the right pre-approval with. They forget to submit the pre-approval. They don't put their compensation in the contract. Nowadays, a buyer's agent is supposed to have an agreement with you before you make an offer as to what they're going to get paid. And if they're asking you as a seller to pay it, it makes a difference in the net in the sales price. So if a seller is asking $100,000 and a buyer's agent asks for 3%, the net is $97,000. If the buyer's agent asks for 2%, the seller's agent doesn't benefit that. The seller does. The net might be $1,000 more to $98,000. In I'm using just basic net numbers. There's other expenses the seller's going to pay no matter what. They're going to pay the seller's agent. They're going to pay search, survey. But the difference is in the net, right? So if you as a buyer's agent, have a buyer's agent and they submit the offer and they don't have a clear agreement with you as to what they're getting paid, and they don't put it in the contract, the seller's agent does not know what the expectations are. Are we paying the buyer's agent? How much are we paying the buyer's agent? Which impacts how much the seller's expenses are, which impacts your net on the contract. A good listing broker, a good agent, professional, include myself in this, I do not want to have to redraw your contracts. I do not want to have to coach your buyer's agent through the entire transaction. And and an agent that has shoddy paperwork, no proper documentations, usually is a good sign they're not giving you as the buyer very good guidance in how to close the property. So if all things are equal and there's a coin toss, an agent that has done their paperwork very well and been very clear, provided supporting documentation, and made sure that there were not mistakes is an agent that might give you that little edge to win it. Lenders are exactly the same way. Attorneys, same thing. If you have a good agent that gets things done and fills out their forms and is responsive and responds to text and takes calls, if you have an attorney that works real estate on a regular basis and is well known as a finisher, meaning they don't let the file sit on the desk, they don't drag things out. There's one or two attorneys in Western New York. I just had an attorney that forgot to order a survey. It costs their seller 30 days in the transaction of rate lock fees for my buyer. They forgot to order a survey. Severely inconvenienced both the seller and the buyer. They represented the seller. I will never recommend them. And in fact, I'll encourage people not to use them simply because that was not the first time they did it. That was the second time in 2 years they've done it. So if you're a buyer and you come in with that attorney, you insist on using that attorney, and everything else is equal in the contract, hey, I'm going to advise my client, look, I just want to tell you, everything is equal. These are dead even. There's no reason to choose one or another. But see that professional they're dealing with? I'd rather deal with this guy or this woman. They're much, much, much more professional. They're much more of a finisher than not. Same thing goes for agents. So if you, as a buyer, are working with an agent and they haven't talked to you about their buyer's agency agreement, they haven't gotten your contract or your form, they don't put in your offer how they're getting compensated and how much, you have to raise a red flag. Boom. Why aren't you guys having this conversation with me? It's part of the NAR settlement. It's a must. And you're leaving vagaries in your offer that if price, if deposit, if inspections, if financing contingencies, if stuff included, if closing date, if it's all neck and neck, and you have shoddy paperwork, shoddy vendors, meaning shoddy bank, shoddy attorney, shoddy agent, you at the end of the day put yourself at risk of losing over this much. And it's not anything I would do. I mean, there are people that are experts in fields and there are people that are not experts in every field. Realtors are not all the same. Lenders are not all the same. Attorneys are not all the same when it comes to closing real estate. Pick good team. So let's summarize this. Thinking about buying a house, try to ignore the list price at first. Go look at the house, get the facts, see how you feel about the house. Try to think like a seller. If they were looking at market averages, what is the market average value for that house? Ignore their list price. Did they pick the empty side of the gas gauge or did they pick the full side of the gas gauge for their pricing strategy? Have they been on the market a day or have they been on the market 60 days? If they've been on the market 60 days, it's probably the full side of the gas gauge and they're expecting to negotiate their way down. If they've been on the market 0 days and there's 32 showings, they picked the empty side of the gas gauge and they're planning on negotiating their way up. Understand that mind thing. Then pick personally, based on what you've seen in the market, what you're willing to pay for the house so that you can go to bed that night after the offers are presented and know if you won, you're satisfied. If you lost, you're not frustrated because you gave it your best swing. Right? Why give it a half-ass effort? Give it your best shot. Number 2, when you do that, you now are thinking like a seller. And then you need to think, what other choices are sellers making decisions on? If I'm in the basket of price, I want to make sure my deposit's good. I want to make sure my financing terms are strong. If you can't, if you're a first-time buyer, limited resources, you're taking advantage of lower down payment mortgages, that's okay too. Just make sure you need to realize there are things that you may need to do. You may need to be more aggressive in price. You may need to waive more inspections than other buyers may need to. You may need to do pre-inspection so you don't have to do an inspection if you're concerned about checking out a property in more detail. You may need to make greater concessions on closing date. So think like a seller. And the seller is making decisions on price, on deposit, on financing. Is there a home inspection? Yes or no? Are they getting involved in extra stuff? Are they meeting my closing date terms? And who is the team of professionals they're working with? Don't stand in houses and complain to the listing agent that you don't like their planning strategy. And so you're going to just take your toys and go home. You never win that way. It's a loser's game, I call it. I may not always like the rules of a negotiation set by the listing agent, but them's their rules, and that's the game that we're playing. So, as always, thanks for listening to You Own It with Jerry Thompson. I will see you again in April. Thanks. Thank you so much for tuning in to You Own It. Don't forget to take a look at the show notes for any resources mentioned during the show. And if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe on YouTube, follow us on your favorite podcast apps, and turn on your notifications so you have access to the latest and greatest. All of our social channels are clickable in the show notes as well. I'd also like to remind you to check out our website, c21jerry.com. There you'll find more info on me as well as my latest listings for all of Western New York. Thanks for tuning in. Remember, through any big decision, you own it.